Morant with a running start. Elevates. Oh, it dunks. Oh, my goodness.
Tie game in overtime. Gasol will turn. His heave is good. Memphis on top. 7 tenths remaining. Conley now a three. Count it. A 15-point lead for Memphis. And Blake Griffin gets into it on the floor with Randolph. Hard to tell if there are any punches being thrown under there, but Griffin took acceptance.
Adams going long. Morant. He hit it. John Morant, insanity.
You gotta be kidding me.
Welcome to Grits and Grinds, a Memphis Grizzlies podcast. My name is Keith Parrish. The bulk of today's episode is talking with Shawn Coleman. Shawn Coleman is part of Bluff City Media's Grizzlies coverage. We talk about some draft prospects and who he hopes the Grizzlies might take on draft night. He also talks about some trades and some hopes of his for what happens both in the offseason and specifically on draft night. We recorded our interview on Tuesday afternoon. Before we get to Shawn, there are a few Grizzlies rumors I thought I would run through. First of all, Jake Fisher from Yahoo Sports is reporting that the Grizzlies are in fact trying to find Tyus Jones a starting point guard spot on another team. So we spent a lot of time talking about Tyus Jones trades, and this report saying that the Grizzlies are looking to find him a spot where he can be the starter. We can try to come up with those teams, who they could be. Jake Fisher himself mentions the Clippers as a landing spot. There's a lot of interesting kind of contracts the Grizzlies could take back from the Clippers, such as Nick Batum or Robert Covington, a guy I've wanted for a long time on the Grizzlies. Also, you could say the Raptors if Fred VanVleet leaves. And of course, then we talk about, well, could Tyus Jones be part of a trade to bring in OG Anunoby? Tyus Jones and 2 first-round picks or something for OG Anunoby, or 3 first-round picks. I guess if they're heavily protected, that's my desire for OG Anunoby. Maybe that would be a thing. Other teams that might need a point guard, you got the Chicago Bulls, you got the Phoenix Suns. I think the Nets still a good landing spot. The Celtics could have some interest, although I don't know if necessarily he would start there. You could think the Lakers, the Spurs. I don't know. There's a lot of teams where Tyus Jones I think would help. The Rockets, where he would definitely be the starter. Maybe that's fewer teams, but it's very, very interesting about the reports of Tyus Jones potentially being on the move this summer. Jake Fisher does say that the Spurs probably are not interested in Tyus Jones and would probably stick with Trey Jones, so that kind of deflates some of the trade ideas I floated in previous episodes. Also, there's a report that Keldon Johnson is not available from the Spurs. The Spurs will not be trading him for picks or to move up in the draft, so scratch off that one as a trade target. I mean, good for the Spurs actually keeping their good players, and maybe they're going to give it a go once they draft Victor Wembanyama. Another thing that I think is very interesting and applies to the previous episode where I was floating some trade targets is Mark Stein is reporting that the Clippers are going to gauge trade interest in Paul George. They're going to find out what they could get for him. Now, there's some talk of like the Trailblazers trading the 3 pick for Paul George. I would not do that if I were the Trailblazers. Use your pick. Also, Paul George is really, really old. He's 33. I didn't talk about that last episode. I didn't think it was that feasible of a trade target. But if he is actually available, well, now I got to sit up straight and start thinking really, really hard about it. As I said in the previous episode, he's the ideal fit. Big drawback, he's already 33 years old. Will he maintain 3 more seasons at an all-NBA level? We know he already has some injury concerns. What are you willing to pay if you're a Grizzlies fan or you're in the Grizzlies front office? What are you willing to pay to supercharge your title chances for the next maybe just 2 seasons? Maybe it's 3 seasons. I think I would be tantalized by the idea of doing something like 3 first-round picks and some young guys, maybe Zaire Williams. Zaire Williams, played high school basketball in Los Angeles, so, a little bit of going back home there. Maybe they have interest in him. I mean, would the Clippers have interest in a sign and trade with Dillon Brooks? Dillon Brooks has had some very good games against the Clippers. The Clippers already said they could be a spot for Tyus Jones. If you salary matched the massive contract of Paul George with, say, Tyus Jones plus Brandon Clark plus Zaire Williams, and then a sign and trade of Dillon Brooks, maybe a modest 3-year, $40 million deal. Like, the Clippers might be interested. I mean, 4 players for 1 player trades are very rare in the NBA, but the Clippers seem to have some roster spots available. I don't know if it's enough to get in the conversation, if people would overpay for a guy like Paul George, who is nearly a superstar. I guess you can debate his superstar status, but he's very, very awesome. He's a great fit for the Grizzlies. The reason why I don't think this front office would do it, our front office would do it, is just because he doesn't fit the timeline. Him being that old, I think they're willing to make a big trade for Anunoby because he's younger, Mikal Bridges because Mikal Bridges is much younger, even something like Andrew Wiggins, which I maybe would favor over Paul George just because of the age and contract. Those are more feasible. With Paul George already being 33, it's not likely. But again, as fans, we can get interested in those things. And then finally, Adrian Wojnarowski mentioned the Grizzlies as a team that could be interested in Draymond Green. And that's not even really a report. It felt to me like he was just talking extemporaneously. I think it's pretty difficult to imagine getting Draymond Green to the Grizzlies. Even if Draymond wanted to come and the Grizzlies wanted to pursue him, that would be a pretty difficult sign and trade. I can't imagine that happening. So that is a rumor roundup as I record this the day before the draft. The conversation with Shawn you're about to hear, we recorded that on Tuesday evening. There have been no real changes league-wide in NBA news since then, so it'll all still be applicable. So anyways, thanks for listening, and now let's talk with Shawn Coleman. It is draft week, and I have Shawn Coleman from Grizzly Bear Blues. Shawn's on the show, a good buddy, a good Grizzlies analyst, and also someone who has technically nailed the draft once. What's your all-time home run? What was the perfect draft you predicted again?
The 2020 draft. Dez, X, and Killian Tilly, who I actually was very excited about, but injuries just didn't let it happen.
Let's bring him back.
Yeah, hey, let's do it.
We got 3 two-way spots.
I know who would be a fan of him. Rob Lowe. With Rob Lowe's Grizzlies now, I bet he would be a fan of Killian Tilly. So
amazing. If you didn't see it, there was like a typo on Hoops Hype saying NBA insider Rob Lowe said the Grizzlies had no interest in Chris Paul. Of course, that's Zach Lowe. But anyway, Shawn Coleman, welcome to the show. Always good to talk with you. What are your hopes this season? I'll break it down a couple ways. 1, what do you hope happens? And then 2, what's your prediction for what they actually do?
It goes a couple of different ways, right? You know, and I'll first say this: if you see Katie Coleman down at the bottom there, I'm on my wife's computer, so forgive me.
We'll block that out. I think we'll make that blocked out. All right.
But no, the hope is definitely there to get the home run, right? You know, I mentioned, and I think you have as well, and others have as well. OG Anunoby remains the goal for me, but it takes 2 to tango, and the Raptors just continue to definitely send out the message that they just are not getting offers that they like, or what they have in mind for using OG to get done is not lined up with the Grizzlies. What stands out about the Grizzlies package that they can offer, it's best suited for a rebuilding team. And right now, you don't have a lot of teams out there that are just purely rebuilding that have pieces the Grizzlies like. So you're going to have to, instead of hitting that home run, maybe a couple of doubles, a double and a single, for instance. And my idea of that is the Grizzlies keeping the 25th pick and using it to move up a few spots to get a prospect they like in the draft, and then maybe using Tyus and a pick or two in the future to go get that wing. I definitely do think they need to turn Tyus into a wing for this season. I think that's going to have more value in the playoffs. But if it's not an OG Anunoby, maybe you go with the Dorian Finney-Smith, maybe a Kyle Kuzma sign and trade Royce O'Neal. DeAndre Hunter, I think, is a guy that you could buy low right now that could thrive in the Grizzlies system. So there's different layers to it. I do think, though, that with as much excitement as there may have been at the trade deadline about the home run hit we all have wanted, it may be less likely now than it was in the past.
Yeah, I kind of think so. So your entire draft night is kind of like me. We're just focused on trades.
Yeah.
I mean, like I'm at the thing where I'm just focusing on free agents and trade targets. I mean, I know these players. Like I know the players in the NBA. I feel like I have a good handle on it, what they cost, what they're worth, I think, to my team, what they're worth to their team. I'm kind of pessimistic though anything's going to happen. Like my prediction for the summer is like they draft somebody at 25 who isn't in the top 30 of anybody's big board, and that's it. We did it. And now, and they'll leak like, oh man, we made a big offer for Cam Johnson. It's like, oh, like they turned down 3 first-round picks for the Cam Johnson sign-in trade. And I'm like, oh, cool. I mean, I do think there's a lot of feasible stuff they should do. And I think like any minute now, or like maybe tomorrow, like they could trade Tyus Jones tomorrow. And I think the Dorian Finney-Smith thing makes too much sense. That it just feels weird that the Nets would keep him with all the stuff they have going on. But maybe they would, and maybe there's other suitors. There's obviously 28 other teams besides the Grizzlies and the Nets, and they're also circling the Nets, being like, do we want Joe Harris just to have a guy, or do we want whoever it is? I don't know what the odds are. DeAndre Hunter is a good target, but let's say the Grizzlies keep the pick, or they trade up like 20 or 15. I don't know. Again, I don't know what home run swings are in this draft. Like I feel like in previous seasons, I've had very concrete trade ideas to move up. Like one of the ones I pitched a version of the trade that happened where we moved up to 10 because it was like, hey, with the Pelicans, they want to get rid of Eric Bledsoe. We could take Eric Bledsoe, move up from 17 to 10 and with other pieces. And it happened. And there's always been stuff like that where I'm like, this makes sense to me. I look at the draft right now. Maybe it's because the whole league feels fluid. Like the Pacers want to move the 7 pick. And I'm like, for what? And the Mavs want to move the 10th pick. And I'm like, for DeAndre Ayton? Like, for what? And then the Rockets want to move down from 20 and the Lakers want to move down from 17. So I'm just like, oh, I guess we'll draft somebody. But you know more of the draft prospects at least. So what do you hope at least is if they take someone, or do you have a better idea of what a trade could be to move up to like the 15th, 13th pick or something?
Yeah, it really depends on what, the Grizzlies are kind of looking for. Do they, to your point, I would love to do something where the Grizzlies take Tyus in 25 and turn that into the Nets 21st or 22nd pick. You're combining a couple of things there. I think that Tyus and Dorian Finney-Smith are a bit of equal or similar value player-wise. I think that it may be to the Nets' best interest to where with Tyus, instead of Dorian Finney-Smith, you only owe 1 year at $14 million, instead of 3. And then also you get that 21st, 22nd pick where you can go get a guy that you want. So the Grizzlies are getting their wing and getting that 22nd or 21st pick. They're also getting the ability to add another young player. Now, what's the difference there? Do you throw in a Zaire Williams in that? I would rather throw in maybe a future first than Zaire. But a couple of guys that stand out to me are definitely Brandon Podziemski. He's known as Podge from Santa Clara.
Yeah.
With names. But Keith, I tell you, I think that, combo guard and in conversations with Joe Molinax and Parker Fleming, it seems like combo guard is definitely something that makes sense. We need a young prospect besides John Bang long-term to possibly replace Tyus. But there's shot creation there. There's good defensive activity there. There's the ability to create his own shot. That's what stands out. There's just a really good upside there potentially for him, and I think he definitely makes sense. If the Grizzlies were to use Tyus in a deal where they, use one of their young combo forwards, you talked about the fact that, myself and you as well, we talk more about these trades because they're involving NBA guys that we know, that we see, that we, can analyze. Maybe the Grizzlies want to go with as much certainty as possible. They go get an established wing, but what about Chris Murray of Iowa, Keegan Murray's brother? He's a 3-4 that makes some sense. There's good scoring ability. There's good defensive activity. There's a guy with him who knows what he's doing. I think that in terms of certainty, it's hard to find a better combo forward than Chris Murray, and the Grizzlies have shown they can make those high floor guys more than people may anticipate. He may be more of a power forward than a small forward. If they're looking offense, the best possible offensive option, Bryce Sensabaugh, he really could be that mid-range guy, the savant that we probably need on our team and can also find ways to score. And then a couple of home run hits, lottery tickets, what have you, Jet Howard and Derek Whitehead. I think that both those guys definitely stand out as options. So I do think that there are options that are there for the Grizzlies, but I agree with you, Keith, with the full roster and the fact that we're now questioning whether we should have doubled down on youth as much as we did last year. It just doesn't stand out as there being eureka fits. Hey, just is too much Grizzlies this year than there have been in previous drafts.
Yeah, everyone has circled the Brendan Podziemski, which maybe that's how his name is said. It's gotten to be so prevalent where I'm like, well, that's not happening. I mean, when's the last time the Grizzlies took a guy that everyone had mocked to them? Like, that doesn't happen. I've grown more hopeful for someone like a Jet Howard, where it is just like the wing type player. I do like everything I've heard about Bryce Sensabaugh. I mean, not everything. There's concerns there, but like saying like, hey, this is just a guy who can get buckets. And I'm like, oh, well, we need those. And like going back to the thought about adding a veteran, they haven't added a veteran in literal years as a franchise. Like every summer, I'm like, I wouldn't mind just bringing in this guy or this guy. And I mean, I'm trying to think like who's the last free agent? Is the last free agent like Tyus Jones?
I guess it would be Slow-Mo.
Slow-Mo was he was the year after Tyus Jones, and like that's a different regime.
Yeah.
You know, it's like they just don't bring in veterans, basically. I mean, they I guess you could say they traded for Justice Winslow. You know, that was sort of a swing, but like they don't ever bring in veterans. And so that's where, again, I'm like, will they finally now do that? I don't know. I'm dubious because I think they still value the idea of like, they might understand that their roster was too young to compete in the playoffs last year or to get where they wanted to go in the playoffs last year, but they're still not going to like, I don't think short circuit their dreams for all the guys on the roster of like what the potential could be. I mean, like one of these things about these trades, like I think I agree with you. And I said it on my previous episode on Grits and Grinds, like Tyus Jones for Dorian Finney-Smith just makes sense for everybody in my mind. But like, I still want to like maybe package. I feel like we need more roster spots still. Like, and I'd be willing to package like a John Conchar or something. I mean, I know he's a good innings eater in the regular season, but like now I start thinking, can we make a 2-for-1 trade? Like how do we get guys out here?
No, I agree completely. And it's time to do that. You know, it's definitely time for the Grizzlies to look to do that, because I also think that, you know, if you trade a Tyus and you trade a young player, maybe you go get a player in the first round that you like. There's some second round prospects that make sense as well. But, you know, I was talking with Keith Smith over the weekend of Spot Track, and he mentioned that, you know, on the MLE for the Grizzlies, they could potentially split that into 2 different contracts this year. You could go get yourself another ball handler, probably a veteran if you trade Tyus, but also you could probably use another, you know, sizable center, you know, that you could put on the roster as well. So I definitely do agree with you that, you know, I understand that the Grizzlies probably want to continue to focus on development, but it's time to develop that development with, you know, certainty, getting something there. They need a low usage offensive producer who can also play defense. And Keith, as you know more than I, you know, the NBA contention window is never as long as you suspect for it to be. Yeah. The Grizzlies have been second in the West 2 straight years. It's time. If you're not going to go purely all in on a home run move, at least do something that minimizes your weaknesses and you got certainty in all places in your starting lineup.
Yeah, I think I'm actually going to be a little patient, though. I mean, as much as I want veterans to come in, from what I've heard from draft experts, there is a lot of talent from, they think, basically 10 to 25. Like the Grizzlies could get someone who would be like a borderline lottery player in a previous season, even if they don't move up, if they sit at 25. So I guess I will still be like, all right, I'm still hoping for a Tyus Jones trade for a veteran. But even if that trade doesn't result in them moving up and they keep the pick, you know, I am going to be excited. Like there's guys like, again, I'm very casual on this stuff, but like Maxwell Lewis, it's like, sounds cool to me. This guy out of Pepperdine. I'm excited about the idea of Derek Whitehead, the injury concerns. And this is totally not scientific. Duke player. I'm like, oh, he's probably overrated. And so I like, one guy I've been talking about is Leonard Miller, where like, I can't say why he just kind of grabbed my attention, but he's held it. And I keep looking into him. I'm like, that guy's cool. Like I would be interested in that guy. Another one that I'm interested in that I'm curious what your thoughts are. or if you had much of a chance to check him out. This is because I agree with you, like you said, that we could use a big. Although I was talking to, I actually was texting with Chris Harrington recently, and he said someone inside the Grizzlies said they're probably not going to do a big this summer. And like, I feel like we need a big. If Brandon Clark's unavailable and Steven Adams, sorry, that's a question mark. Like I want a big. This guy's probably not ready to help immediately, but like James Najee, I watched him play in the Eurobasket, and like I didn't know he was so young when I watched him then. He was playing just, he didn't play much, but he played some minutes. And so like I'd be interested in them taking like a guy like that with their pick at the 25 spot.
Absolutely. And one thing that stood out about the Grizzlies and the bigs is that they've helped their bigs develop into something more. Like with, Jonas Valanciunas, it was the consistency on the scoring. They opened up the 3-point game with him. With Steven Adams, it was the playmaking. So the Grizzlies can develop these bigs. I agree. James Najee probably is more of a, stash guy, in terms of, he'd be with the Grizzlies. You're not keeping him over, C's or anything, but he would probably be a guy you need to give a year to ramp up, but he may not necessarily be that bad of an option, especially a year from now. Do the Grizzlies potentially want to use Steven Adams or Brandon Clark as trade, money matching in a trade? Then you've got a natural fit to come in next to Jaren. I definitely do agree with you. Long term, we always need to have a sizable center, even if it's a reserve role, to support Jaren. So I do think that he could be someone that makes a lot of sense. But at the end of the day, I think the Grizzlies are probably looking for someone that, more can be a perimeter-based scoring option, because I think that's the biggest part of their offense where they need to improve. But I think you could talk yourself into James Najee making some sense.
When you mentioned Podziemski earlier, is that what you like, or is that your guess on what maybe the team would like?
I think that there is a lot to the Pods. I know that he continues to seem to be the guy that's mocked to the Grizzlies. Yeah. I've always kind of stuck with Chris Murray as being the guy that I like, just simply because of the fact that he checks a lot of boxes. I think he's a definite type of guy who kind of in that Desmond Bain mode. Hey, he's coming in. A lot of what to expect from him, but could the Grizzlies get more from him? I think they could. And I think that he also fits what we need, more certainty in that combo forward spot. He may be more of a power forward than a small forward, but Podziemski is right up there as well. We traded up to 21 or 22. I wouldn't mind picking up either one of them. But, Pods, I'll be honest, I started looking at him when others, mentioned him, kind of gaining steam in mocks. And when you look at it from a statistical perspective, there's definitely a lot there. He's very similar to Konchar, but the shot creation makes him very attractive. If Konchar had the athleticism to create his own shot, I think that he definitely would be a long-term option for the Grizzlies, and that may be why Pods makes sense.
Yeah, and I know Sam Vecini has him really, really low, very much a doubter of Podziemski and what he can do, and his athleticism not being enough for the NBA level. What are your thoughts on the Grizzlies if they trade up? I don't know what that would look like, but what's your dream if they moved up to, like, is it 12 or 13 or 14 or 15? Is there a guy you haven't mentioned yet that you'd be like, that is who I would, maybe if someone starts slipping and then we'd have a chance to get him late lottery or, mid first round?
Sure. Yeah. Two names that stand out to me are Casey Wallace and Grady Dick. And the reason why that is because Casey Wallace, to me, I think you're going to give me a long distance high five on this one. Casey Wallace reminds me very much of DeAnthony Melton. And I think that there's a bit more offensive upside with him in terms of the dribbling aspect of things, shot creation, things like that, long term. Grady Dick, the reason why I like him is because I think that there's more to his game than just the shot, but the shot could form. And if you could then potentially have him come in, stand out as a potential shooter, well, hey, maybe that makes Luke Kennard expendable next summer, as a money matching piece, or at the very least, you've got a pure shooter coming off the bench. You never can have too much shooting. So Grady Dick and Casey Wallace really makes sense. I know others have talked about Nick Smith, from Arkansas, I know Parker Fleming is a big fan of his, and Bryce Sensabaugh will be picked in those late teens as well. But a Grady Dick and Casey Wallace, especially if we get up to that 15 range, if we were to pull off like a DeAndre Hunter in 15, for instance, for whatever reason, I think
what's your package for that? I worked out like a 3-way deal on the last show that was like, if the Spurs covet Tyus Jones, okay, then we can send Tyus Jones to the Spurs and we send Brandon Clark to the Hawks. And then what else do we have to send the Hawks to get back DeAndre Hunter and the 15th pick?
Yeah, and just in, I do podcasting for the Braves as well, and just talking, with a few people who also, keep up with the Hawks. It seems like that if we put together a package of like a Brandon Clark, one of our young combo forwards, maybe a Laravia or a Williams, and then 25 as well as maybe a future pick. If you were to include that Golden State pick, for instance,
Yeah.
maybe that could get you the DeAndre Hunter in 15. And if the 2024 draft is not as deep as the 25 draft, that or the 23 draft, that could make some sense, because in that package, the Hawks get less long-term money to commit to, which they definitely want, and they get 3 options to potentially fill out their roster with young players. So I think Brandon Clark, a Laravia, Nazire Williams, 25, and maybe the Golden State pick could be something that could work out for DeAndre Hunter in 15.
Yeah, I mean, again, what we would get at 15, obviously an unknown, and hopefully it would be something good. The idea of us like packaging multiple things to bring in DeAndre Hunter, for me, just reeks of desperation, where It's like, DeAndre Hunter is not a guy I get excited about. Where it's like, he's a guy. I mean that, and like, maybe that's an overused term I use for average player. He's a guy. Like, he just does stuff. And sure, he's under contract for a long time. He kind of makes a lot of money. We need a starter. And this guy, you could do worse. It's like, well, we're trading a future first for, you could do worse. And I don't know. It doesn't inspire the excitement, really.
Yeah. And to me, DeAndre Hunter, the problem is that there's inconsistency there and there's been injuries. I think the idea of DeAndre Hunter, if he could play to his talent level, and I think that the Grizzlies could expand his game a little bit, that could definitely be someone that we need. But to your point, trading multiple firsts, trading another young player to commit to 4 years and $90 million of a guy who, may all he does is hit corner threes and defend on occasion, I can understand that not being exciting. But I also do think that perhaps he has more upside than like a Dorian Finney-Smith or things like that. But $90 million is certainly a lot to commit to.
He certainly has more upside than Dorian Finney-Smith. Dorian Finney-Smith, this is where I guess you have to listen to my inflection and the connotation. He's just a guy in a better way. Like, we just need a guy. He makes half of what DeAndre Hunter makes, and he doesn't miss games. So like, I'll take that. He can guard somebody. He can be fifth man on offense. Just be on the wing, knock down some shots. That works. Like, DeAndre Hunter's never played 70 games in a season.
This is very true.
And so it's like, I guess 70 is kind of a high mark, but like he's played 206 games in 4 years.
Yeah.
And that's like, this is who we're.
Both of them do make threes in the playoffs, which intrigues me. But, how much can you read into just a couple of playoff series? So,
yeah. Let's take a quick break, and then I'll come back with Shawn Coleman talking more about what the Grizzlies might do on NBA draft night. Grizzlies 2023-2024 half-season plans are on sale now. Place your deposit today and lock in your opportunity to purchase seats before they go on sale to the general public. Plus, half-season plans provide significant savings off single-game pricing and more. For information, visit Grizzlies.com or call 901-888-HOOP. All right, Shawn, are there any deep sleepers that you want to do called shots on? Some Xavier Tillmans or whatever it's going to be this year, some Killian Tillies. I will say, based on my very precursory, casual learning about this draft class, there's a lot of fun names. They go pretty deep, where I'm like, that sounds good. There's this Jordan Walsh and Kobe Brown. Like, all right, I'm into that. But who are some guys, if they're active in the second round, or maybe these just end up being undrafted guys that they place on the hustle or on their two-way spots? Who are some guys that you hope maybe they could pick up?
Yeah. So, I talked about yesterday on Twitter, that Kobe Brown and Demoy Hodge are two, older prospects from the University of Missouri. And the University of Missouri actually, reached out to the Grizzlies this past offseason. And believe it or not, they wanted to take some notes from the Grizzlies offense to better their offense. Now, that may come as a surprise, but there's connections there. And then all of a sudden, when you look at, kind of that statistical formula the Grizzlies like to go by for their prospects, smart decision-making on offense, good activity, assists, rebounds, defensive activity. Brown and Demoy Hodge definitely stand out. So those could be guys that coming into the Grizzlies system, they can max out. Jordan Walsh is another name. And the reason why I say that is because he's good defensive upside. And I definitely think, we just saw in the finals that good defense on the wings, good depth defense on the wings, kind of like a Bruce Brown or somebody like that. Could Walsh turn into that type of player? You get a lot to work with, a lot to work on offensively, but I do think he has one of the higher defensive upsides in the draft. And then another thing that I've, kind of stayed consistent with is with us having three two-ways now, is that there are a lot of bigs in that 50 to 75 range on NBA big boards. Drew Timme, Gonzaga, Oscar, I believe it's Tshiebwe of Kentucky, Colin Castleton of Florida. Those guys that can do more outside of scoring, like Tshiebwe is an excellent rebounder and scorer. Timme can do a little bit of everything. Castleton's a good passing big. I think the Grizzlies getting a young big on a two-way could make some sense. I know we just, had Kenneth Lofton Jr., and I know Grizz, fans love him, but I think that another sizable big could make some sense. So those are just a few names that really stand out. I don't really know if there's really a home run swing, someone that could just absolutely turn into, a hidden find like a Herb Jones of New Orleans. But I'd love for that to work out for the Grizzlies. I'd love for them to be able to find a second-round pick that could definitely turn into something on the wing. And, maybe a Jordan Walsh or, Keontae George. No, not Keontae George. Keontae Jordan, I think his name is. He's another guy that, potentially could make it. Keontae Johnson. And then one last guy is Seth Lundy out of Penn State. Good shooting, good defensive activity. I think he's someone else that can make sense for the Grizzlies in that second-round range. So maybe not home run hitters, maybe not, all-star surprise upside, but guys definitely, I think, could fit what the Grizzlies usually look for.
Yeah, it's kind of interesting where in these late picks, they have 2 second-round picks. I think they're probably going to move. You would think they might move those, or, maybe they just use them to fill both their remaining two-way spots. They saw Vince Williams Jr. on a two-way spot. Of course, they could let him go at any time, and open up that spot. It does seem like to me, just looking at where the Grizzlies are with the Brandon Clark injury, with the Ja Morant suspension, that they might functionally look for replacements on two-way deals, which is kind of weird for a team that plans to be good. But I'd be real surprised if they don't draft in the first round, if they don't get a point guard. I'd be real surprised if they didn't get a ball handler just on the two-way, just to be like, we got to have somebody to handle the ball. I mean, maybe you could have, like, if you knew everyone was going to be healthy, you could certainly last 25 games, or if the suspension gets shortened, you could last that amount of time with just Tyus Jones and then a combination of Kennard and Bain and Conchar and whoever else. Like, you could do point guard by committee, but if Tyus Jones gets hurt, if Tyus Jones has foul trouble, like you feels like you need another point guard. And then it just seems like a big, like a guy who can jump. And honestly, for me, it's athleticism. It's athleticism on the wing. It's athleticism all over the court. I feel like this team honestly lacks athleticism. Yes, we have the highlight reel of Ja Morant, but everybody else, now that Brandon Clark's not there and Zaire is no longer playable, you got to have guys who can fly around the court, who get up and down. And like Kenneth Lofton Jr. is fun, not traditional athleticism. He's not a high flyer. It's not above the rim. Xavier Tillman's not above the rim. I want people who can catch lobs, who can get out, who can block shots. And I would love to see basically whoever they take. Like, I don't know. This is, maybe I'm just being bitter. I don't want like the math guy. Like, this guy checks all the analytics. Oh, this guy had a 4% steal percentage and a 4, I need athleticism now. I don't need like a kind of okay guy. And that's probably the wrong approach for the draft, especially with our front office. But like, I want guys who pop athletically and guys who have that extra motor. Like, I need guys who go. Like Vince Williams Jr., he checked a lot of boxes for me where I'm like, oh, he's a defense first guy. He's a deflections guy. But his thing is it's limited athleticism and obviously a questionable shot. And it's like, those are now 2 boxes. I don't want to check that. I can handle questionable shot, but I can't handle questionable shot and questionable athleticism. I got to have some pop.
No, and I think that you bring up a great point. If you wanted to, potentially, target a point guard, I know that there are a few within, the draft Twitter community that, like Isaiah Wong, I believe out of Miami, he could be an option. But I do agree with you. At some point, you've built the team on finding steals, finding those high 4 guys that could help you out by having higher ceilings. Desmond Bane has turned into a 16-game guy, what have you. But yes, I do think that especially that athleticism, allowing for those players, if you were to get a high athletic guy in the second round who all of a sudden becomes a rotation player for you, athleticism allows for you to recover quicker. And as you get late into the season, those type of energy guys can be very, very helpful because those are the type of guys that, like, for instance, Miami finds, they're not necessarily all the time athletic, but those athletic type guys could be guys that can give you those outlier performances that help in the playoffs. So I definitely do agree with you. Maybe going to bucking the trend a bit to go with high athleticism, that could be something the Grizzlies do. That makes a lot of sense.
Yeah. Well, Shawn, the draft is just about 48 hours away from when we talk right now. Hopefully, I'm hopeful they do. Like me, it's not just I'm addicted to content. I want some changes on my Grizzlies roster, and so I hope something happens between now and the draft where we do move some guys out, move some guys in. Like hopefully for me, it's not just for picks, but I'm excited about what the next 40 hours can hold, and I will look forward to talking with you once maybe those things break. Would you want to do any walk-off called shot or
yeah. Yeah, at the very least, I won't sit here and, I'll say it. I think that the Grizzlies over the next 48 hours, perhaps, but at least over the next week, I think that Tyus, maybe one of our combo forwards, and future picks, like from 24 on, will be used to go get an established wing. Again, I hope that we're in there for OG, but, maybe it's one of the Nets, maybe it's, a creative deal to get somebody we're not talking about. But I think they do it on two fronts. I think they use Tyus, future picks, and maybe one of their combo forwards to go get that established wing. But I do think Memphis either uses 25, maybe trades back into the first round. I think that we're going to get a guy that we want because I think that our front office does think this is a deep draft. But also, I think that we will have made a move for an established big. So I think we're going to see multiple moves. We're going to see multiple guys moved off the roster, and we're going to bring in guys who I think are going to line us up to have better, balance on our roster and hopefully better playoff success.
Yeah, and it also could be a thing where the Grizzlies, I wouldn't be surprised if they traded back just because you got the Pacers with the 29 and 32nd pick. You got the Hornets. They got a lot of picks in the second round, I think 34 and 39. It's going to be weird. It's going to be a weird draft night where a lot of these teams have picks where they're not going to use them all. And, my fear is our team that's so enamored with prospects is like, wait, we can get more picks. Let's do that. And it's like, no, man, step away from the draft.
I'm almost 95% will say this, that if we do make a trade, it's going to be one of those 3 or 4 teamers. Like, now I know that I've talked a little bit about on Twitter that we could get in this, Bradley Beal deal potentially. I think that's more of a floor type opportunity than it is a home run. But I do think Memphis, you're going to see creativity. I think that you will see if the Grizzlies make multiple moves, at least one of them will be that 3 to 4 team deal.
Yep. I hope so. That sounds fun. Anyways, Shawn, a pleasure as always. And I look forward to you coming on again sometime.
Hey, always a pleasure, Keith. Thank you so much. Hope you and your family are well and enjoy this week.
Thanks, man. You too.